Anyways, here's Wonderwall.
What up, party people? Welcome. This is the not quite impromptu stream that's
The
been
25 and a half hour planned impromptu.
Yes. We are not having one in Rome this week. Matt had another show that he was doing this week, and then the past couple weeks he's been out of town. So we will be getting back to our usual programming with When in Rome next Thursday. We'll have something fun for you guys.
It's nice. I think the nicest part about all of this is that when Matt can't show up, you're like, "Hey, Aldous, I appreciate being the ringer." That's I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Of course, and especially with the fun stuff we have to talk about here this evening.
Yeah. What in the holy hell did you send me?
Miranda Murray is in the chat. Rant Promptu. Thank you for joining us, Miranda. And then obviously our one other viewer is you. So
yes,
that tracks. But for any of you guys that decide to join in, we're about to have some fun. So the story goes is I was on the phone with Crazy Mad yesterday, and he had initially told me about a book that he got in the mail that's from a series that I grew up with. Or I guess is like it's in that series' universe, and the guy hasn't like put out anything in a hot minute. So I went to go like check out the book and see if it was something I'd pick up at that point in time. And I decided not to, but I was wandering around Barnes & Noble in the fiction section, and I found this fucking gem. Hold on. Let's bring you up. Daughters of Sparta by Claire Haywood. So
this was why.
So the immediate thing that drew me to this is that the front of the book is like, this is a must read for fans of the book Circe by Madeline Miller. Now, Madeline Miller has written a couple of books based on Greek mythology. Her first book was a book called Song of Achilles that was okay. I had some issues with how she portrayed certain things, but I actually have a great deal of respect for her because I reached out to her while I was on deployment. And I approached her about my issues, and we actually had a 12-15 email exchange. And she was actually she wrote to me consistently while I was deployed. It was really cool. But her book Circe is genuinely fantastic, and I do appreciate it's one of those rare times where you have something that's noted with the feminist reimagining of mythology, but it works, especially with a character like Circe, who has this kind of rich understory to how she appears in the Odyssey and her connection with several of other characters, and the way that she weaves this into a narrative of Circe is brilliant, and it works very well. It was one of my favorite reads, I think, of 2019 or 2018 when it was released. Absolutely fantastic book. But ever since then, there's been this whole thing of we need to capture the lost voices of women in mythology, as if there weren't several plays and tragedies written from these characters' perspectives that hails them as tragic heroes or something.
Well, before all of that, can we just touch on the historical context of what it would mean to be a woman in Sparta?
Yes. So,
and this is important because the thrust of this is that somehow she found quote unquote, engagement and personhood in leaving and following her own destiny, which makes absolutely no contextual sense, because where she was headed, she would have had less, not rights, but less personhood. And what's the fancy word they always use?
I know what you're.
Yeah, not activism.
Agency.
Agency. She would have less agency in Troy than she would in Sparta, because in Sparta, very unique amongst most of the Greek city-states. Women were allowed to own property and to participate in public life, because when the men were away, they were kind of the pseudo-ruling class. The Hellas,
Correct.
were the ones that did all the work. So she wouldn't have had to cook or clean or do anything like that. And that's of any level. If you were a citizen of Sparta, it didn't matter if you were middle class, upper class, or royalty. You wouldn't do that. The Helots would do all that work.
Correct.
And the other thing, and this is standard throughout all of Greek mythology, or Greek history. Actually, it's not even mythology. It's Greek history. Contrary to every other Greek city-state, Spartan women were notorious for being labeled as they rule their men. The men don't rule their women. The women rule their men. That's how much power they held within the society. And in a lot of, even in as much as it's terrible when it comes to historical context, the 300 Spartans movie, the adaptation of Frank Miller's graphic novel, showed
300.
With 300
with Gorgo and
it showed how the women were allowed to speak. It showed how their voices were carried, because if their husband wasn't there, even if their husband was there in many instances, they were still listened to because they were property holding citizens.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate to you in just a second, but first we've managed to quintuple our chat viewership. So we got to say hi to some people. We've got Ray Haylock, Tugs guys in the chat. We got B Roses in the chat. We've got an arrogant ape in the chat. Salwete to you as well. Man, bringing me back to Latin class. It's crazy. But so to play devil's advocate to you, Aldous, is at this point, what you are talking about is specifically in the pretty like the golden age of Greece prior to that, and so the Sparta of the Trojan War era, back when you had like Mycenae, Minos, and everything like and everything like that going on, isn't necessarily the same culturally.
No, and so it's very
the foundations are there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very important to point that out. That yes, everything I just listed may not have been exactly the same at this time that the Trojan War occurred.
Right.
However, culturally, things tend to remain constant. And so the constant for sure that you would see in that society would be at least strong callbacks to what we are presented with in classical Greek Sparta, as we know it historically and through the texts. So the chances of there being much deviation from that are very, very slim.
Correct. And let's really quickly, I'm gonna read the thing here, and then I'm gonna start to break down how a lot of this is bullshit just from a knowing the backstory behind everything kind of deal. So let's take a look at this. So this is what we have as in terms of the synopsis of Daughters of Sparta. For millennia, men have told the legend of the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, but now it's time to hear her side of the story. Daughters of Sparta is this tale of secrets, love, and tragedy from the women behind mythology's most devastating war, the infamous Helen and her sister Clytemnestra. First of all, no one ever in the classical community would ever consider Clytemnestra to be a woman behind the Trojan War. Just full stop.
Yes.
Like she is supporting cast to the uptillionth degree. So now let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this synopsis. As princesses of Sparta, Helen and Clytemnestra have known nothing but luxury and plenty. Okay, that's fair. With their high birth and unrivaled beauty. Helen, yes. Clytemnestra, not even remotely. They are the envy of all Greece. But such privilege comes at a cost. While still only girls, the sisters are separated and married to foreign kings of their father's choosing.
Okay, stop
this
right
is
there.
Not accurate.
Thank you.
This is not accurate, and we're going to get into this. This is the whole point where the entire premise of this falls apart here in this fucking paragraph, and everything that comes after it is a load of bullshit. So foreign kings of their fathers choosing the powerful Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus, which she is misspelled. Yet, even as queens, each is only expected to do two things: birth an heir and embody the meek, demure nature that is expected of women. Okay, I mean, I can give her that on Clytemnestra's behalf. But when the weight of their husband's neglect, cruelty, and ambition, what ambition from Menelaus becomes too heavy to bear, Helen and Clytemnestra must push against the constraints of their society to carve new lives for themselves, and in doing so, make waves that'll ripple through the next 3,000 years. Daughters of Sparta is a vivid, illuminating reimagining of the Siege of Troy, told through the perspectives of two women. Yeah, that's
not
the important fucking
recanting,
word.
Not a retelling, a reimagining. Because
and
in the Iliad itself, God, it's nothing but negative references towards Helen. For
Helen is very critical of her decision.
No, she displays extraordinarily self-conscious and self-awareness about the scandal of what her behavior has done.
She almost turns herself over because she feels guilty.
No, and absolutely. And I was going to say too, in I believe in the Odyssey, isn't it implied that she convinced the Trojans to let the horse in?
No, but she does return to Menelaus without any qualms or anything like that, and she doesn't stop him from killing Deiphobus or anything like that.
I thought when Menelaus recounts her role, that implies that she convinced them to bring it in.
I'd have to brush up, but okay. I don't think
because that adds a duplicitous side to her. Because at that point, she realizes what she's done, and the guilt consumes her, which makes her even more guilty. Because not only she's self-conscious of it, and then she acts on that self-consciousness, which implies that she has understanding of what she's doing, which flies in the face of what we're trying to accomplish here. But again, it's been it's been a nigh on a decade since the last time I read it. But sadly, even with that time frame and the fog of memory and age blurring my vision, I still seem to have a better grasp on it than someone that wrote a book about it.
This is told through the perspectives of two women whose voices who have been ignored for far too long.
They're not ignored. Okay, I did brush up a little bit on this, and I would like to go through. Obviously, the most recent and when I say most recent, the most what I would consider classical reference is, of course, her reference in Faust. She was referenced in Faust. And then, but when you go back, and I'll read that quote. I jotted it down for a reason. Euripides talks about her. Sappho talks about her. Homer talks about her. She is by far and away not forgotten.
The only one of these characters, and I feel like this is the real missed opportunity here, is rather than writing a book about Helen, writing a book about Clytemnestra would allow you way more artistic license. And would be way more interesting.
I disagree on that. I don't think there's anything really interesting about her.
But I don't know, man. She's effectively ruling as regent for Agamemnon while he's away fighting a 10-year war to bring her sister back, and she ends up sleeping with, getting in bed with Agamemnon's nephew, uncle thing.
Yeah.
No, dude, there's some interesting shit to talk about with Clinton. Just having her be this whole thing of her goal becomes destroying everything that Agamemnon built and causes the downfall of Mycenae as an empire. You could do some interesting stuff with Clytemnestra. Helen, on the other hand, sure, as you said, Helen's actually very well fleshed out between Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, the post-Homerica, the tragedies and everything like that. Helen is a figure that has been fleshed out in pretty much every angle. Some texts portray her as a victim of persuasion and what have you, because if you go into the super mythological aspects of it, Paris doesn't get her of her own free will. He entrances her with the golden apple of discord, right? So, like, there are certain things where, like, I mean, there's a reason why you have, like, when Paris takes Helen away, it's not called the flight of Helen. It's called either the abduction or rape of Helen. Right? Like, really, the bad guy of the Trojan War isn't even Helen. It's Paris.
Yes.
Helen, yes, has made bad decisions, but by the time of the Iliad, which is our, like, most prominent text that we have of the Trojan War, by the time of the Iliad, she has so much remorse and is willing to, like, go back and stop all of this and stop people from dying. And Hector's just like, honey, this is too late. Like, at this point, your job is to get your shithead lover and my dumbass brother out there to fight. Yes. Because he's not doing it.
At this point, I feel like you just brought me on so I could say yes after every statement you made.
No, I apologize. I will give you a chance to speak.
You're fine, man.
Hey, man, this is the opposite of our Napoleon show, okay?
I get you. Yes.
But really quickly, let's go back here, because I know you wanted to say stuff about this, and I definitely want to say stuff about this. So, while still only girls, the sisters are separated and married to foreign kings of their father's choosing. Now, Agamemnon and Menelaus are anything but foreign at this point in time.
No, that's my talking point. They're the same people, for the love of God. You can't. It's like saying going across a state line is, a different culture or people. It makes no sense. They're all Greek.
I mean, yes and no. Mo Biggs has entered the chat. Hail Mo, thank you for joining us. But this is what I will say to that effect. Remember, Agamemnon and Menelaus meet Helen and Clytemnestra while they are in fucking exile.
Yes,
because their uncle has taken the throne of Mycenae, and so they flee their deaths to go to King Tyndareus, who is Helen and Clytemnestra's father. They go to their court and build up a fucking army.
Yeah, but this isn't a foreign court. This is...
I mean, what we have to remember is Greece is not Greece at this point in time. It's you are a member of your polis, right? So it's like they're Mycenaean, they're Spartan. Now, the Mycenaeans and Spartans had been chummy, which is one of the reasons why Sparta will eventually emerge as one of the powerhouses on the Greek peninsula. But, like, there is like a division there. They're like they do not consider themselves Greeks. They consider themselves, I'm a Spartan, I'm a Mycenaean. But that being said, that you can still play nice. But the whole thing is that to call them foreign kings when they literally grew up in the same fucking hall. And in fact, Helen picks Menelaus. And this is the thing that...
But if we ignore that, then her book actually has a little bit of, content to it that might make sense.
Mo Big saying, how impromptu can it be if I get a notification 24 hours ago? It was supposed to be last night, but I got some last minute work I had to get done, and Aldous was working on some stuff as well.
I was?
Okay, fair enough.
I sat in my chair and pined for this stream last night for hours.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just stared at an empty StreamYard room.
And you were just like, oh, how dare he?
Yeah. I sighed every 15 minutes.
But point is that Menelaus and Agamemnon were not strangers. And they weren't just... And Helen and Clytemnestra were not just sent off to their kingdoms. And on top of that, how the fuck... King Tyndareus is the king of Sparta. He has... Menelaus becomes his heir by marrying Helen. Like, that's how fucking Menelaus gets the throne of Sparta. And this is something that I completely blame on fucking Troy. Because Troy is the fucking movie that put this in everyone's head, where they have that stupid fucking line between her and Paris, and she's like, my father just picked Menelaus and sent me off to Sparta. I don't feel kinship here. Okay. Sparta is her fucking home.
Again,
anyways, I'm gonna go ahead, Aldous.
No, I'm gonna go back to Faust, because that entire concept came out and was born out of, whether it was Troy or something that came before Troy that Troy grabbed onto and brought to the public mind. Either way.
Probably Helen of Troy. Garbage.
But go back 2,000 years. Go back to Faust. Or go back a couple hundred years. Go back to Faust. And what was Faust writing about? In Faust, in that story, when Marlowe wrote it, he's drawing on what at the time would have been the classical understanding of who Helen was. And at that point, you've got Virgil and Homer as the only two people that are really talking about her, other than the Romans that came after, and some of the Greek. But they're sourcing to that. And so with what he's talking about, his play is for an educated class that would have been very well read in this. And so you have to look at the subtext of what Marlowe's trying to bring across. And in Faust, in Helen's parts, she expresses a notable regret for leaving Menelaus, and she refers to herself continually as a whore.
Yep.
And that's important because she's expressing self-blame, that she was the one responsible. Now, granted, that's in a play, it's fiction, but again, it's all based on the classic understandings of the time. Only in the last 30 years have we seen any deviation from that classical understanding. And again, if you go back even further and you look at what what Euripides was talking about, and he's the Greek playwright. He's a Greek playwright from the 5th century BC. He talks about Helen as a fascinating character who's really torn. Is which way does she go? She follows her lust or heart, or however you want to phrase it, but almost immediately regrets it. And she pleads for mercy in one of his plays because she was consumed by a momentary bad decision, and she sees people being slaughtered because of it.
Yes. And I think that you hit there is, and this goes beyond just Faust. This goes into the Iliad as well. When you see Helen for the first time in the Iliad, she is on the walls of Troy with Priam, and it's one of the funniest chapters of the book, in my opinion, because it's like Priam's like, you Helen, tell me who all these people are. And I'm like, you're the king of this city. This army has been sieging you for 9 years. And you're just now asking, hey, who the fuck are these people? But
no, it fits with Helen's character, because she doesn't give a shit until it's brought to her attention, which really in my mind fits, because she comes across almost as aloof and not realizing it until her nose is rubbed in it. And I think the context there that you're missing is that the king's well aware of who's outside his gate. He's rubbing her nose in it because it's been 9 years.
That is actually a very good point that has never been brought up to me, and I think that's a great way to put it. And that is something I hadn't thought of, because I when I'm reading the Iliad, there's a lot of stuff where I take it for face value, and so like Priam being like, yeah, can you please tell me about who all these
Priam's
people are?
Priam's not a fool.
I know, like that's why it had always astounded me. Is like, this is the guy who like goes and makes Achilles feel shame in his rage in the last chapters of the book, right? Like, he's not a dumbass. He's a very intelligent and perceptive king. So it always like blew my mind.
He speaks to Achilles
like a father.
He speaks to Achilles as a father speaks to a son who he's disappointed in.
Yes.
And you speak to a son different than you speak to a daughter. The way he's speaking to Helen here is a father talking to his daughter who has dishonored herself.
Yeah.
And he's like, showing her.
By the way, who are all these people?
Your choices have ramifications. I'm dealing with the ramifications of your choices. What are you doing?
Yeah. And so like that's our first look at Helen is she's describing this army while occasionally bashing herself for her bad decisions.
Right. Now
And
the corollary for that, and the point that you're going to, I think, is like what Sappho was going to when he presented presented Helen in some of his plays. And Sappho never presented Helen as either a victim or a whore. He presented her as the epitome of love, that she was just consumed with love for Paris. And it was only her heart that carried her, regardless of all of her other obligations. And at this point, is important to say, she did not just leave her husband and her duties. She left her children. And I think that's the most damning part.
According to some sources as well, she also abducted one of her children, because according to depending on which text, she had an infant son with Menelaus as well that she brings with him, and Menelaus doesn't see that kid again until he's a toddler. At which point, that kid is calling Paris dad.
Yes,
which, that's a whole other thing. But the big point here, and this goes back to bring it back to this Daughter of Sparta book, is the big thing is they are trying to make this seem like none of these women had agency in who they married. And Clytemnestra, okay, I can give you, again, it's just one of those things where Clytemnestra gets married off as a standard political thing. Helen isn't actually Tyndareus' daughter. If you were going by mythology, Tyndareus is not Helen's father, Zeus is.
Yes.
And as such, she is not treated the same way.
In the form of a goose.
Yes. And so as such, she is not treated the same. And they have the whole they have a whole bunch of suitors who come to vie for her hand. But she's already picked Menelaus. They grew up together. They fell in love. He was also attractive and young, and she was vain. And she picked him. This is exactly why the Oath of the Suitors is made, is because Tyndareus realizes he has all of these great warlords here that could shit stomp him at this point in time.
So at this point, I'd like to stop you right there, because you talked about the Oath of the Suitors. So do you think there is a thread to be pulled between the Oath of the Suitors that starts this and what happens in Ithaca at the end of the Odyssey with the suitors that are going after Ulysses' wife?
Oh, it's absolutely meant to be paralleled.
Okay.
Because Odysseus comes up with the oath. That's not an accident. Like that's literally retreading a literary theme.
Okay.
Right? Like,
so let's focus on, before we can so in order to break her point, right? We agree that there's a literary theme between the two, and it's fully intentional on the part of the author, Homer.
Yes.
Let's jump to the end of the Odyssey and talk about what is his wife? What is
Penelope.
Odysseus's? Yeah, Penelope. How is Penelope responding to all these suitors? What is her response?
She ignores them.
She ignores them. She puts impossible tasks before them, and only when she has been beaten down for, God, how many years has he gone?
10.
20.
20, because it's 10 and 10 at Troy, so, and 10 at sea.
Right, so it's the 10 at Troy is assumed. The 10 on the journey home is the replication of what it's the replication then of what Helen is dealing with at Troy, right? It's the not knowing of how it's going to end. So Penelope knows her husband's going to go to war. The war ends. The next 10 years are her suffering in inversion of Helen's suffering, right?
Correct.
So now how did Helen responds by just going into the arms of Paris and just, I'm just going to deal with this. I'm going to ignore everything going on beyond the walls.
But Penelope's made of iron.
Exactly. So they're contrasting characters. So to her point, when she says, Daughters of Sparta is a vivid, illuminating reimagining of the siege of Troy, told through the perspectives of two women whose voices have been ignored for far too long. The story has already been told between two women. Those two women are Helen and Penelope. One responded with childish angst, and the other acted like a grown adult.
And they're also both related because Penelope is frickin' Helen's cousin.
Yes.
And this is what the Oath of the Suitors like. So the
it's
reason
she has never read either one of these two. She does not understand
100%.
parallelism, and she doesn't understand the contrast that goes on, because they're just as much as they're contrasting Penelope and Helen, they're contrasting Odysseus and Menelaus and how they respond and how they react.
And it's no accident that Menelaus and Helen host Odysseus for him when he's like at the tail end of his journey and he's going through and recounting all of this stuff to them. It's as I said, it's all by design, right? Like all of this stuff is meant to parallel. And like Odysseus going back to the Oath of the Suitors, the whole point of this was Odysseus was initially a suitor for Helen, and then he got to Sparta and he met Penelope and they hit it off. And so he creates this solution for Tyndareus, and his reward is he gets to marry Penelope.
Right. And I would hate to break you out of a good rant because I feel like you're just on the cusp of one. But we have had some people joining, and they're a little confused as to why we are ranting about Helen.
100%. So, and I saw that as well, which is why I kind of abbreviated what I was going to say and just summed it up there. We've got some people coming in. So Crazy Mad has joined us. I apologize for the stream chat. That's
it is actually all his fault.
And then obviously we had Mo Biggs come in. We also have Sugar Chris is here. And so what exactly are we ranting about? Ogden seems strongly identified with Menelaus. It is absolutely tragic because Menelaus is probably the most sympathetic character in the Trojan War. He has been done the dirtiest by modern media.
Yes.
Like they treat him like shit, and it is not okay. But Helen, are you saying Helen of Troy? So they're asking. So Sugar Chris is asking why we're talking about this, and Mo is saying he doesn't have an idea. The other day, yesterday, I was at Barnes and Noble looking at a book that Crazy Mad was telling me about, and I ended up finding this book called Daughters of Sparta, which is a feminist reimagining of the Trojan War, telling the perspectives of Helen and Clytemnestra, and it is about as terrible as it sounds. And we haven't even gotten to the I actually have the preview of the book open here, so we can even read some of that and have some chuckles. Because like this thing has like a 3.9 out of 5 on Goodreads, and I'm reading this like this is the most fucking like, oh my god, I hate people. But anyways, point is that, you know, any sort of knowledge, and I think that this is the big thing that you hit on very well here, Aldous. If you have read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and even if these were the only two things that you had ever read about the Trojan War, you would realize that the base premise here is fucking flawed. And this is why Circe works and this doesn't. Circe takes all of the stuff that, like, Madeline Miller spent years researching Circe, going into all of her background in terms of her pedigree and tying it to other characters, and then really harping on, like, really focusing on learning all the stuff that she does in the Odyssey and everything like that, and creates a very carefully crafted narrative within the confines of existing myth that plays off one another, and she does a brilliant job. This is, well, I don't like how these two characters are portrayed, so I am going to make them victims and call this reestablishing the voice of a lost character. But that's not accurate, because especially with Helen, this character has been incredibly well laid out and founded out, and has been the focus of so much work throughout the years. And
as
it's not like
cited,
a lot of this work is like her being vilified. There are absolutely works where she is, but what I think is the funniest part about this is this idea of, oh well, the woman's voice isn't even taken in consideration. The most famous piece of work that vilifies Helen is all about the perspective of the Trojan women.
Yes.
Like literally the biggest play, like probably the most well-known of the tragic plays that we have is the Trojan women, and that is where Helen is most vilified, is in the eyes of the mourning widows of Troy. And it blows my mind that it's like we're here to champion the voices of women who haven't been taken in consideration. It's like, motherfucker. Like, oh man. Who? Or as Mo Biggs describes them, the troublesome shrews. Or as Ogden describes them, the troublesome shrews. That's fantastic, Mo. Great. Crazy mad Trojan condoms were invented to stop the spread of feminism. Well, they worked about as well as the Trojans defended their city. So,
right. Well, and I think if you really, I think if she really wanted to do something interesting.
Wait, really? Arrogant Ape said no gods either. Wow, this book sucks. Yeah, it's like, bro, like Helen, like the whole thing about Helen is that she isn't just a more like, and this is the thing that blows my mind is this is another sentence that's in here where it talks about when the weight of their husband's neglect, cruelty, and ambition. All right, again, Agamemnon, absolutely. Menelaus doted on Helen. In fact, in at least 5 or 6 plays, Agamemnon and the other warlords of Greece scrutinize Menelaus for not being more strict on her as a wife. Like they give him shit. And it's brought up even in the Iliad. Like he was absolutely doting on her. Like blows my fucking mind that this is even a fucking like just the absolute lack of research and lack of respect for what was there before. And it's like, oh well, she's only interested in these voices. Like, okay, cool. You're disregarding everything because you've genderized it. You've decided that because these stories were passed down by guys, that makes it completely, unequivocally untrue. Right.
Well, I think
you're more pieces of shit.
I think, and this author does have, there were so many opportunities in this book, as you've stated. I'm just going to add one more, and Hector's wife, Andromache.
Andromache is a phenomenal character,
and she is a foil, a classic foil, almost a textbook definition of the foil for Helen. She's loyal, where Helen is not. She speaks up against her husband, where Helen does not. She warns Hector of what's going to happen continually, that he's going to die for this harlot, basically.
Yeah, she has no give a fuck for Helen at all.
No, and I think that would be
despises her. And
if you're going to do this, okay, if you're going to take this stance and you really want to push this line of thought and this arc, I think that's a much better character to put your main focus on and to draw out what she's looking to do here. And here I am, a layman. I haven't read this in nigh on a decade. And, I get what she's trying to go at because everything has an agenda. But there's better ways to go about it. This is the laziest, most pathetic path to take on this, and it requires no thought. And it like I said, it just shows that the source material wasn't read. And I would like to reference that real quick, if I might, Mike. When talking about why is this important, this is important because books like this have a 3.9 rating. And what people are, before people read the Iliad, before they read Faust, before they read Sappho, before they read Epicurus, they're going to read this. And then they're going to go back and read the classics and have,
like, this is wrong.
Right. They're going to have a misunderstanding of the context because of works like this. And this is where this kind of thing becomes semi-dangerous. Now, especially in today's day when classics are not enforced. I know my father read the Iliad and the Odyssey with me. I know that's true for Odin. Those are important moments, and they're bastions of Western civilization that encapsulate certain standards of understanding when you cross-reference things, right? So, I mean, if you've never read, I go back 100 years, and 100 years ago, you could quote Shakespeare to any other well-read person in a metaphor, and they would understand what you're talking about. 100 years before that, you could quote Chaucer, and people would understand what you were talking about. You know, the Bible has always been a standard Western, well-read person's reference. If you draw a comparison to a parable, or if you draw a comparison to a story, people understand it because people that are well-read, that was the most published book, they understood you because that's what they would have read. The Iliad and the Odyssey are right there. They're foundational blocks. And when you start messing with that, you're messing with the foundational understanding of how metaphors are understood. And you're breaking fundamental understandings that should exist. And a culture needs to have that. This isn't we changed Captain Marvel, which is that's not a foundational building block. This is, we changed something fundamental about Western civilization, and we're pushing it out there, and people are reading it and taking it as, oh, I never took it that way before, without understanding that it is a house of cards that is built on a false premise. And it's tragic for the long term, because the more this kind of garbage is propagated, the less we're ever going to get a positive understanding where everybody is operating on at least the same base level of reference as well-read people. If you can't do that, then it's already fundamentally broken.
Absolutely. Real quickly, we got a fantastic comment from the great Mo Biggs. He says, "We get it. Simple Alice put the pussy on a pedestal." Yes, indeed, Mo. He did. My comments require even less thought, and you appreciate them well enough when you eventually get around to them. I'm trying to be balanced here, okay? I fail, but I am only human. Arrogant Ape says, yeah, for all the fart sniffing, calling this a reclamation of untold stories is bullshit. My grandma told me, I don't care what the book says, Helen of Troy was a strong black trans lesbian. Oh, man.
She was more of a man than Paris. I'll give her that.
Oh, yes, she was. She had more. Well, like, that was the thing that was, like, one of the things that I wish that modern takes on Troy would do is they always present Paris as, like, a wimp fighter, and that was the thing that was frustrating to, like, Hector and the rest of the princes. Was the reason why Paris was found out is because he bested all of the Trojan princes in combat. Like, he could fight.
Yes, he just didn't want to.
The problem wasn't that he lacked the ability. The problem was that he was a fucking coward. And the moment that there were actual stakes on the table, he didn't want to get involved. But like for instance, in the Iliad, he initially doesn't want to go out there and fight. Hector chastises him. He goes out there, starts realizing that he's really good at killing things, and goes on a rampage until he gets his ass kicked by Menelaus.
Right. Take it easy, Ray. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks so much for joining us, Ray. And she don't need no man. Speaking of Helen, I found this. I used it as part of our freaking thing on the thumbnail. hold on, I'm trying to bring this up. But I found this while I was scrolling through Facebook. One of the groups that I'm in used like an AI art generator to make this, and I thought it was just hilarious. So I used it for our thumbnail. Hold on, where did you go? Here we go. Look at that glorious thing.
That is magnificent.
It is so good.
When you see that face, don't you just want to scream out, "Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. Her lips suck forth my soul. See where it flees. Come, Helen, come, give me my soul again."
Yeah, of course, absolutely. That's totally what I get from that.
Yeah. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the towers of Ilum?
Yeah, pretty much. That's what happened. True story, bro. For those of you guys who didn't see our thumbnail, I was very proud of this. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm sorry for all the Marlowe, but I've read Marlowe a lot more recently than I've read Homer.
Oh, dude, you're all good. It's the thing that's refreshing about that is I'm a huge classics guy, and like I've read Faust and what have you, but like my big focus is always this is how it was written in Homer, post Homerica, tragedies, etc. Right? That's my background, and then you bring in a more modernist classic, like not like 20th to Victorian era perspective on these stories, where they're heavily rooted, obviously, in classical literature, because they were like reading these texts and sometimes even rediscovering these texts, right? So like they were.
No, for sure. I mean, Virgil's a relative modern rediscovery for Western civilization.
Exactly. So Mobig says the face that left was a classy euphemism for her bukkake. Jesus. Oof. Mo. That was rough, man. But yeah, like it's just unfortunate.
Right.
That you have something like this. Don't get me wrong. I do think that there is definitely room to take on stories that take the perspectives of characters, especially female characters during this period, and giving them a bit more of a narrative voice, a bit more agency in these tales. I just think that she picked the wrong fucking ones.
No, I agree. I think Hector would have been a much more interesting character to follow, because
Cassandra
would have been amazing. There's a lot of options here.
Dude, imagine that. Imagine if you were given the powers of prophecy, but because you didn't want to sleep with Apollo, he said, okay, well, fine. I'm going to make everybody not believe you.
Right.
Like, and meanwhile, like...
Well, and not only not believe you, but you are cursed to know that what you're saying is right.
Correct. Meanwhile, your brother gets like half right prophecies that everybody believes because they like him because he's not crazy. Like,
no, for sure. And for those of you that are out there that might think that, oh, you're just hating on this kind of fiction and you couldn't possibly love it, Stephen Pressfield's Gates of Fire, which is a novel about Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans. I love that book. And that book is it is just as terrible on history as this, but it's well written and it's fun. And there's a lot of myth also associated with that we've learned even since that book was published in, I think, 99, 98. That, things have changed, and we understand what went on a little bit better, and that really, to a large degree, we already knew it even in '99. But the story, sometimes the myth overlaps as the history. But there were more than just the 300 there. So
that face screams, "I want to speak with your name, Mark."
I know.
Oh boy.
The chat of these little shows may be small, but my God, is it excellent! Thank you, John.
Yeah, they're awesome, and we have Corey Barton. Don't worry, Corey. We won't just hang up on you this time, even though you're towards the end.
Yeah.
And
hey, Corey just had a great tweet that he shared out.
Did he?
Yeah, his brother Clayton is doing an art stream, art lessons and stuff.
Yeah,
and you can get great content and great feedback from both the Barton brothers, but I'm assuming it's mostly Clayton on that. So if you're an artist and you're looking to improve your craft, by all means check it out, because I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. And Clayton does
go completely off
work.
topic and offer a plug. So
but I mean, to go back a little bit, to piggyback off of what Aldous was saying, is one of the big things that I've talked about a little bit alongside this book is a book called Circe by Madeline Miller. And it's a similar kind of concept where they're bringing a voice of a more active voice to a relatively passive character from the mythology standpoint, with Circe, who is the witch that turns Odysseus's men into pigs in the Odyssey.
Yes.
And Madeline Miller does a great job with it. I think the book is great. I have the hardcover of it. When I had my full library out, it actually sat next to my copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's how much reverence I had for it. It's a very good book. And the reason why it works and this doesn't is Madeline Miller ingratiated herself in the myth. She straight up established her relationships through her pedigree, and she used this as a way to tie in and make little short stories that filled up to the point of where she is in the Odyssey, and the resolution of it is fantastic, and it does have a feminist message to it, but it's not, I'm going to rewrite everything. Like, all the characters feel the way they should. When Odysseus comes in, the way she writes Odysseus is perfect, right? Like, how she treats all of these gods and deities and everything, how she treats Circe, all of it feels organic to the classical text. And this is the difference between a good writer that knows what she's fucking doing and this trash.
Right. No, for sure. And to comment on what Corey just said, which is just keep the stream going. We totally want to hear Roman stuff for another. We gotcha, buddy. I know it's Thursday, but we're talking about pre-Greek stuff tonight.
Yeah.
So,
we're talking about Proto-Greek history and the Trojan War. So eat a massive phallus there, Corey. That scooped up to 11 real quick.
There you go.
But
I actually haven't ranted tonight, Corey. I made a succinct point that was slightly long-winded regarding Western civilization and the standardization of literature. But otherwise, I think I've behaved quite well, as opposed to when Odin throws up terrible Napoleon trailers, and oh my God, do we have content coming for you?
Oh man, it's gonna be great. Are you talking about the Ridley Scott comment?
Yeah, oh God,
that's gonna be fun. We'll do that next month. We'll do that this Monday. Corey's saying what? No rant? No, it's more along the lines of, because this is something that, like, I am very this is where Aldous knows way more about Napoleonic stuff than I do. Like, I know I have a strong base, but like I am at like the intermediate level, and then like Aldous is at sage level on Napoleon.
No, God, no, man, no.
By comparison,
perhaps, but by no means am I an expert. I just read a lot.
Yeah, I know, but and that's where on this stuff, dude, I've read the Iliad and the Odyssey over a dozen times each.
Right.
right?
To Corey's next question, did Romans believe in a flat Earth? No, they did
No.
not. And you can tell that because they would put mile markers at every mile, and they understood the rotation of the disc on the cart that they used, and they understood that there was curvature based off the math and the diameter of that disc.
Additionally, the Greeks had already
Or they had
calculated
already mathematically proved it.
the diameter of the Earth in the classical period. It was just all thrown away due to silly people.
Yeah.
But anyways, but so this is where, as I was saying, this is where the Trojan War especially is something like antiquities is my wheelhouse. Like that's what I do. Like that's what I studied professionally, I should say. Like I have 2 or 3 pieces pending peer review. Like,
Ooh.
yeah.
Of course, even saying peer review these days, it that used to mean something, and that
It
really
did.
doesn't mean anything.
I think it's still an accomplishment if you get something published in a journal, but like there's so many asshats in academia at this point. You're not wrong, but I'd like to think that what I've written has merit, and I've done an extensive amount of research, and I hope that my findings would pass muster. But like ultimately, yeah, like that's the whole thing. Like this is my wheelhouse, and like one of the books that I have that's like sitting in my docs that I've written is the first book of a historiographic retelling of the Trojan War called Promecoy. Like this is my deal. And whenever I get around to that, I have like 30 pages of like 10, 15 pages of footnotes on like everything for Promecoy. Like so like that's my whole thing. Like this is my jam. And so I figured it would be a fun time to come on and rant about this. And we were initially going to do it last night, so I'd hit Aldous up, and I made sure that he was free tonight. But like, I had stuff come up.
I'm always down for this kind of thing. And Corey, you're asking a question. What's a good question that would get Aldous to go on a rant? Well, every Friday at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you are welcome to tune into The Gutter, where I rant for a solid 20 minutes before I even let anyone else talk. So, by all means, check it out, man. It's a good show. I like to think so, at least. I'm proud of what I am able to put together with my co-host JP Raiden Radio every week. We're on our 29th episode this week, and we will be talking about Rich Ayala's Roach Balls, as well as the art and journey of life that has been Robert Crumb. So it'll promises to be a good show. But to just kind of take a little bit of a step back, and again, I really want to reinforce this: is why is all of this important? And for generations, for me, it was only 3 generations back when my ancestors would cite that while we believe that everything that Homer wrote about is true, we have no archaeological evidence for it. In 1871, Heinrich Schliemann discovered what is now commonly accepted to be Troy. And we have archaeological evidence that the city and things that match what Homer talked about happened. And that's only grown over the last 150 years. And as we continue to do archaeology, whether it's the discovery of civilizations that don't fit the quote-unquote correct current archaeological timeline in Turkey, like Göbekli Tepe or Göbekli Tepe, those things, the timeline's always adjusting and changing based off of archaeological evidence, and that's wonderful. But what doesn't change is the context of how these classic stories fit within the things that they inspire and move forward. And when you break that bond, when you break that chain, you have a massive problem when you start walking backwards because you no longer have the connections. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's the saddest part, is because there seems to be a concerted effort amongst some very poorly read, very poorly educated people to present their viewpoint. And like, take for example, I've read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I would never dream of writing any kind of a book without spending nigh on a decade of reading about, not just the actual text, but interpretations, and where did the subset interpretations come from, and what have they inspired. This is something that requires a lot of effort to even touch, not to the level of a peer-reviewed paper, but to get the history and the context
100%.
and the characters right, and to not spend that time. It is what is becoming the standard in Western civilization for mass market publications, and it's to our detriment. And it's poorly written, poorly researched trash.
Yes.
And it's not even. I love pulp magazines, but at least pulp magazines had a good plot that was based on something that was physically possible. This is just it's a fantasy. It's a romance novel, but it's not even a well-written romance novel.
Yeah,
and we didn't even get a chance to pull up the book, and we've already spent an hour ranting on it. But
yeah,
pull
so
up
to
the
give
book
you
and read a little bit, just so that people can get a context.
To give you guys a little bit of a teaser from this, this is how this book opens. This is from Chapter 1, Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra, have a care, girl. Your spindle's gone all a wobble. Clytemnestra's eyes snapped into focus at the sound of her name. In front of her, spindle bobbled. The spindle bobbled. If I can talk. In front of her, the spindle bobbled. Her carefully spun wool unraveling quickly. She stopped it with her hand. Not like you, Nestra, tutted Thecla, turning back to her work. The crease in her nurse's brow lingered, but at least she had returned to calling her Nestra. Clytemnestra had never liked her full name. It was too big, too cumbersome, but she liked it even less on a sharp tongue. It was her sister, Helen, who had taken to calling her Nestra when she was too young to manage the whole thing, and it had stuck ever since. Clytemnestra is older than Helen.
Yes. Well, there's also the context of we're referencing their English names when their Greek names would have been shorter.
I mean, yes, but I think the more stupid thing here is
no, that is pretty fucking stupid.
It is stupid, but you're like all right. So you know this. What's the number one rule of historiography? History didn't take place in a vacuum. Do not remove places, events, and characters from the times in which they occurred. Do you really think that a fucking proto-Greek woman is going to be bitching about the length of the name she was giving her and be giving a nickname?
No, because nobody... If your name was too long, it was common to do that. The other thing is, it's only long in English. It's not long in the Greek. And contextually, it's not even that long of a name in Greek.
No. Especially by comparison to other people you will fucking see.
Right. Calling, like in English, right? Like if somebody's name is James, you call him Jim. You're truncating 2 letters off their name.
Yeah.
That was common in Greece as well. However, their name might be like 5 syllables, and you might be cutting it down to 3. And that's extraordinary. It's even more common in Rome. But it's just, again, it's poorly researched trash.
Yeah, and like this is the whole thing. I think that this sentence is supposed to read, it was her sister Helen who had taken to calling her Nestra when she was too young to manage the whole thing. I think it's supposed to be the she is referring to Helen, but because of how the pronouns are used here, it makes it seem like Clytemnestra was too young to manage the whole thing.
Oh, yeah, that's how I took it. I just assumed it's poorly written. So
I mean, it sounds like it. Helen was sitting beside her now. They had been working wool together all afternoon, and Clytemnestra's arm was beginning to ache from holding up the distaff. Her sister was singing a song to herself as she watched her spindle twirl on a thread. And though Helen had a sweet voice, she only knew half the words and kept repeating the same verse. Clytemnestra wished she would stop. The woman's room was dim, the walls plain, the air thick and still. As one of the most innermost rooms of the palace, it had no windows, through which daylight might spill, nor any fresh breeze to take the stagnation. It was summer, and the warm air was made warmer still by the many women who filled the room, lamps, torches, and illuminating their dark heads and their white working hands. This, I'd have to look at the architecture on the Proto-Greek Acropolises, but I don't think that this is accurate. I don't think that this reflects how those...
Does it say what they're spinning on the loom? What imagery?
No, just saying thread. There's no mention of wool or anything. Here we go. Clytemnestra's woolen dress clung to the sweat of her back. So, like, we're going to assume that they're spinning wool.
Okay, no, right there, that's a problem, because she would not be wearing a woolen dress that would touch her back.
Yeah,
she would have
is also accurate.
She would have a cloth or a linen slip underneath the woolen dress. No. That's straight Roman garb of the era, but
I'm not going to keep reading this. This is bad. If you guys want to torture yourself, you can do that. I'm not gonna. We've been here for an hour.
It was like a taser to the mouth.
Real quick, let's check in with the chat.
Well, can we just one more time? Can we make sure we dedicate this show in some way to Crazy Mad?
Yes, of course. Okay. Screw you, Crazy Mad, for making me go to Barnes and Noble. Anyways,
yeah, why did you even go to Barnes and Noble too? Could we spend a moment and talk?
So I grew up reading The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, and I love those books. I know that they're not the best in terms of fantasy, but they were what got me into actually exploring the genre outside of Tolkien. And so Paolini just came out with a new book on Murtagh, who's one of the lead support characters that I really enjoy in the Inheritance Cycle. And so I went to go take a look at it. I read the dust cover on the book, and the premise seemed okay, but I wasn't sure I was ready to spend drop $30 on it, you know? So then I just was wandering around the store and was looking into the fiction section, and I found this pile of shit. And it was not the only book of its caliber in the fiction section. There were a few more, but this one was the most egregious. But what does Ogden think of the TikTok trend where the guy's girlfriend keeps asking how to think about? I think it's fantastic, and we have a whole bunch of those clips. You clearly missed our Why is Rome stream. All this wobbly bobbly brings to mind Chuck Wendick.
Oh God,
Jesus, too big and cumbersome, eh? Yeah, too big and cumbersome. I know that problem all too well. I'm sure you do. But Sugar always finds a way to make it fit. He's not going to blue ball a client. Oh, phenomenal work, Mo. I stay far away from dudes who introduce themselves as Jonathan. Brother, you're John. Better Jonathan than JoJo. No. Yes. JoJo is best. JoJo is life. I wish I had a Dio soundboard up to do the to do one of his JoJos. But anyway, I wish the author would stop. I do too. Maybe she would if Ogden would stop donating to her Ko-Fi account. Jesus, that's a harsh accusation. That's a good one, Mo. When I typed that, I was almost afraid you'd make a joke about my preference for Johns. Yeah, I'm catching up on the good stuff, guys. I already have Sugar Chris around for those types of jokes. You're safe, Ape, because I'm here. I totally bought that book. Thank goodness for you, Sugar. Glad to hear Paolini is still writing. Yeah, I was shocked too, because like I hadn't heard that he had produced anything. He also just recently released an illustrated version of Aragon, which I will probably get for my kiddo.
Oh God, he's the guy that wrote Aragon, and you read him?
Yeah.
And you admitted it on air?
Aldous, I was in middle school when he came out with the book.
And you didn't know it was shit?
Dude, it was fine.
No, it was shit.
I mean, it was written by a 16-year-old, Aldous.
And we're surprised it's shit.
Anyways, we are going to call it an evening. Aldous, thanks so much for coming on.
Anytime, buddy. Always appreciate it. Thank you so much to our chat, first of all.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I was just about to get to that. Thanks so much for the chat.
Thanks
Mo,
to you
were
second.
in top toe.
And then, Thorns to Crazy Mad.
Yeah, absolutely. Crazy Mad, you're the devil. Anyways.
Absolutely.
You all have a good night.
Yes.